be happier to be here again this evening. And again, congratulations. We are amazed to say that we've had over 700 registrants for tonight's event. So we know that this is a very important topic for parents. And we're really pleased to have with us Lynn O'Shaughnessy. Lynn has been a favorite of our program for years because she offers something very special. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her in just a moment. First of all, I want to say again, thank you to the Fremont Union High Schools Foundation and their Parent Resource Network. We will be posting the link to that in the chat. Do look at the chat this evening. You'll be seeing some links that are useful to you. And then later in the evening, we will be having you enter some questions. We'd like you to put questions in the Q&A box, comments in the chat. So again, in your questions, you'll have some come up, I know, during the presentation. We would ask that you keep them fairly short so that we can get to as many questions as possible, and also general. So again, if you could ask questions that are important and would be valuable for everybody to hear. Tonight, again, we've heard from Rita Allen, president of the foundation. Lynn is going to offer about 60 minutes of content, and then we're going to have 15 minutes or so of Q&A. So that will happen at the end of the presentation. We will be sending a follow-up email to you all tomorrow that lists a few of the resources that we will mention in this talk this evening. And again, at the end, we will have time for some questions, as many as we can get to. I'm going to apologize in advance if we don't get to everybody's questions. We will do our best, but we know we have a lot of interested parents on the line tonight. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about our featured presenter this evening, Lynn O'Shaughnessy. Lynn is a nationally recognized college expert, a higher ed journalist, speaker, and educator. Her chief goal is to help families with teenagers become smart college shoppers as they search for schools. A former Los Angeles Times reporter, Lynn has written about college issues for such national outlets as the New York Times, Consumer Reports, National Public Radio, Money Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Lynn is the author of the Amazon bestseller, The College Solution, a guide for everyone looking for the right school at the right price. And she writes about college on her popular blog, The College Solution, which attracts about 1 million visitors a year. Lynn is a proud native of St. Louis, Missouri, and an alumna of the distinguished University of Missouri in Columbia, the nation's oldest journalism school. A resident of San Diego for the past 27 years, she's also the proud mom of 2 college graduates who are thriving in their adult lives. Please join me in a really warm welcome for our presenter tonight, Lynn O'Shaughnessy. Thank you. Take it away, Lynn.
All right. Thank you, Charlene, for that introduction. I appreciate it. What I'm going to talk about today, the topic is finding the right school at the right price. During COVID-10, I guess I went too fast. We're just on COVID-19 right now, right? So to get the most out of the next 75 minutes, please stick around for the questions and answers. I will go through the presentation, then, have time for that. You're probably worried, why you're here today. You're probably worried about how COVID-19 will impact your family's college plans, worried about how much college will cost. That's like a worry regardless of whether we're in a pandemic or not. You're worried about taking on too much debt. You're worried about blowing up your retirement nest egg and making the wrong choices. There's a lot of colleges out there, and most times people just fish in a very small pond, but there are a lot of really good schools out there to discover. It's natural to stress about, the leap to college at any time, even more so during a pandemic. And I know that myself because I went through this process with both of my own kids who are, successful. We went through the college process. They found schools that gave them merit scholarships. They flourished academically, socially, and they graduated without any debt. We didn't have any debt. So that's what I like to share with families, is how you can do that yourself. Find good schools without killing yourself on the cost of college. And the way you do that is to become an empowered consumer. Okay. That's critically important. So what you will learn today, did I share my screen? Oh, did I? Yeah, I guess it is. Is my screen being shared? I don't know. I guess it is now. So here's what you'll learn today. You'll learn how to answer the, oh, in case you didn't see my family, I guess it wasn't shared, but anyway, that's my kids. So to make sure that you're make the best college decisions, you really need to become an empowered consumer. And here's what we're going to learn today: how to answer the financial aid question with appropriate strategies, why you should use a tool to determine what the price would be for a school. And also I'm going to look at some admission changes during the pandemic and what hasn't changed. Also understand what types of higher ed institutions exist. There's not, I think a lot of people primarily focus on research universities, but there's other types as well. And then also I'm going to address, this is an important issue, especially in affluent school districts, is does it matter where your kids go to college? Do they need to go to the most selective school they can get into or not? Okay. So your first step, okay, in this whole college process, I would say, if money is an issue, and I got to say it is for almost everybody, regardless of what kind of income you have, is answering this question: will you qualify for financial aid? Okay. And income alone won't answer this question. All right. And that's because there's a lot of different factors. For instance, your marital status, how many students are going to be in college at once? That's, if there's more than one, that's a huge issue in terms of what what you'd be expected to pay for college. And then there's some other issues, your home equity for some schools. Okay. So what you need to know to answer that, well, will I qualify for financial aid or not, is you need to obtain your expected family contribution. And an EFC is what parents would be expected to pay at a minimum for 1 year of their child's college costs. Okay. An EFC is expressed as a dollar sign. So the higher your EFC, the more you'd be expected to pay, right? Now, there's a lot of EFC calculators out there. I like the College Boards. And the reason why I like, and you can just Google EFC calculator and you're going to find it. The reason I like that one is because it uses two EFC methodologies. It uses what's called the federal one, which is attached to the FAFSA. And the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And that is the application if you expect to get any money from the federal government, the state government, or the vast majority of colleges and universities in this country, you must fill out the FAFSA. Now there's this secondary one, okay, the CSS profile, which is linked to the institutional methodology. And the CSS profile is a creature of the College Board. So it's good to use their EFC calculator because the CSS profile, some of its formula is proprietary. So they know, how different inputs into this calculator impacts whether you would qualify for need or not, or whether you should just be looking for merit scholarships. Okay. So that's why I like the College Board. Now, one thing I should say about the CSS profile, the vast majority, or maybe all of the schools, private schools that you've, have the biggest brand names, okay, they are profile schools, okay? So if you would apply to those types of schools, like the Ivy Leagues, a Stanford, a Northwestern, an Emory, a Rice, Washington University in St. Louis, my hometown, you would apply for the profile. You'd have to apply for the profile. This is just what it looks like when you go to the homepage. Okay. Now I'm going to give you different examples of families and what EFC would look like. And then I'm going to share with you strategies for people that have different EFCs. And as I said, or maybe I haven't said yet, the lowest possible EFC you can get is $0. Okay. You are impoverished. You have no ability to pay for college. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to pay something, but it just shows that the formula says you can't pay anything. Now, on the other end, the other extreme, there's no limit to what an EFC is. Okay. Now I'm going to give you this example of a wealthy family. They make $275,000 adjusted gross income a year. They have $500,000 in non-retirement assets. The reason why I mentioned non-retirement is because these formulas do not count retirement money. So you could have a lot of money in a 401k or a IRA. That's not supposed to count in terms of whether you would qualify for need-based aid or not. And then this family has some, a big chunk of home equity. Okay. So what would their EFC be? It'd be very high, right? I mean, I'm showing both methodologies. Yeah, there's no way that this family would qualify for need-based aid. That doesn't mean that they have to pay full price. That's not what that means. But in terms of need-based aid, they're not going to get any. And you can see here's an example. Let's say the cost of the private school or the family was interested in was $70,000. Their EFC is $90,000. Their demonstrated financial need is 0. Okay. Now let's look at upper middle class family, $160,000 adjusted gross income, $125,000 in non-retirement money, and they have a much lower amount of home equity. Okay. Their EFC is in the $34,000, $35,000 range. Okay. So, it depends on the school. Now, there would be very little chance for financial aid if you're looking at for instance, a state university. Let's say it's 30,000. Your EFC is over that amount. There's no way you would get it. But in this example, you could it's possible. And a lot of schools, you'd be aiming for merit scholarships, but it's possible at schools that, give good aid. You could also get some need-based aid or a combination. It's not a matter of, you get all need-based aid or you only get merit aid. It's you can get both, or the merit aid could fill in for your need. Now let's look at low to middle class example. Adjusted gross income of $52,000, not much money in the bank, and they don't own a house. Okay, so their EFC is very, very low. Really, they can't afford really anything for college. So let's look at the strategies for all of those, folks. Okay, for the strategy for wealthy and upper middle class people, when searching for schools, students should primarily be looking for private and state universities that provide healthy merit scholarships. Okay. And there are many schools in that category across the country. Okay. Now, for upper middle class families, it would be possible to obtain need-based aid for a family at private schools that provide excellent need-based aid. Okay. That would be schools nearly all elite and highly selective that meet 100% of financial aid or close to it. Now, some of those schools, though, the brand names that you see at the top of US News rankings, private schools, many of those, however, assess home equity. Okay. And that's something you can get. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, of how you can assess if a school, what kind of impact your home equity might have. And since, you're in where you are at, Silicon Valley, a lot of you probably have a lot of home equity. Okay. And once again, though, really what you're looking for, if money is an issue, is getting a discount. It doesn't matter if it's considered need-based or merit-based, right? You just want a discount. So what I'm saying is, so if your home equity knocks you out of the ballpark, then you could just look for schools that give merit aid, right? And oftentimes, the biggest factor in most of the country is the parents' income. It's not their assets. Okay, and the other strategy that wealthy people and upper middle class can take is they should consider looking at public universities in and out of their state. For people in this category are not going to get money from if you go to a CSU or a Cal State or UC, right? you should not expect that your child would get merit scholarships. They're not going to get need-based aid, but it's very unlikely they will get any merit scholarships. That's because the state four-year schools in this public universities here give very, very little merit aid, because they prefer to say, hey, we don't have enough money for everybody who needs it. Why would we give merit aid to kids who can pay for college? So if you are looking at state universities in California, you should assume you're going to pay full price for those. And then what you want to do is compare, okay, what would it cost to go to a private school in California or elsewhere? Or what would it cost compared to, the UC and CSU prices to a state university outside of California? Okay. Now, most of the people who look at state universities, the most popular option for kids, I mean, in terms of what school gets the most Californians every year, is University of Oregon, which is expensive for California kids. And University of Arizona is next, which can be expensive if you don't get a merit scholarship. At Oregon, you're hardly ever going to get a merit scholarship for California kids, because the schools that are the most in demand, they can charge more, so to outsiders. Okay. I mean, that said, there's some schools in the West, for instance, that have much lower sticker prices than, say, at Oregon or a University of Arizona, and give scholarships on top of that. Like, one that comes to mind is, well, University of Oregon is expensive. University of Arizona is sticker price is much lower, and they have scholarships. Montana State is another one, lower sticker price, lots of scholarships, as is University of Utah in Salt Lake City. So, as I'm going to say during this presentation, it's good to don't just look at the same old schools everybody looks at, right? Like an Oregon or a University of Colorado Boulder, which is extremely expensive too, because they can do that because kids want to go to Boulder, want to have fun, want to ski, want to be in the Rocky Mountains. You can get the same thing in Montana State and Bozeman, which has the Rocky Mountains skiing, beautiful area too. But kids aren't, thinking about that. And Montana State actually is one that they have been highly regarded for their undergraduate research opportunities, which is very rare at research universities. But anyway, I'm kind of digressing here. Okay, so let's look at strategies for low to middle income kids. They should make sure to apply to their own state schools, 2-year and 4-year institutions. The community colleges in this state are the cheapest in the whole country. I mean, the trick is getting to transfer out. That's the tricky part when kids are going to community colleges. Also, for these kids, they should definitely complete the FAFSA, and if applicable, the CSS profile as early as October 1st during a student's senior year in high school. You have to get that in. And actually, the state deadline for state aid isn't until March, the beginning of March, but there's a federal grant for kids, low-income kids who qualify for the Pell Grant, big federal program for low-income kids. And that secondary grant called the FSEOG can run out. The Pell Grant won't run out regardless of when you file the FAFSA, but this secondary grant can run out quickly in different campuses. So that's another reason why you should absolutely, I feel like everybody should, if you're going to file for financial aid, do it around October 1st. Okay. And for those of you who go, well, why should I file for financial aid? I'm not going to get any need-based aid. Well, the only reason you would do it in that case is if you wanted to take advantage of federal student loans or federal parent loans. Okay. And then the other strategy for low to middle income kids would be looking at qualifying for the Cal Grant, Pell Grant, which you need to file for financial aid, as well as the Cal Grant. I mean, you need to file the FAFSA, right? And then potentially more need-based aid from state college to university in California. Now, here's something that I think it's important for families to know. The Cal Grant is the big monster program when people are going to four-year schools. And I'm going to show you here, this is the income ceiling right now for a Cal Grant. For a family of four, adjusted gross income, $110,400. So if you have a family of four, you make more than that, you're not getting a Cal Grant, okay? Which means you're probably, as I said before, almost certainly going to pay full price for a state school in California. And so then you would have to compare that to other schools, you know, either private schools or state schools outside of California. Okay. And also, even if you meet the income ceiling, there's also an asset ceiling, non-retirement asset ceiling. So for your kids, the asset ceiling for the household or for the parents would be $85,500. You can't have more than that in non-retirement money to qualify for the Cal Grant. Okay. And then the final strategy for lower to middle income kids would be, you know, high achieving students could explore elite and highly selective schools with excellent need-based aid. They can also look for merit scholarships at out of state public universities. But something that students need to know is that non-residents won't get need-based aid if they're applying for a state school outside of California. These kids would qualify for aid, you know, in California, but no, if you're going to apply to some school elsewhere, like let's say University of Michigan, you need a lot of aid. They're not going to give you any aid because they give their need-based aid to kids in Michigan, right? Why would they give need-based aid to a kid in California? But Michigan is one that gives small merit scholarships. But, you know, as I said before, the schools that have the biggest cachet, the ones that kids really want to go to, whether it's Colorado or Michigan or Virginia, those schools, they're going, or Oregon, they're going to charge more because they can and not give out many merit scholarships. Okay, so the next, so I would urge everybody to use an expected family contribution calculator. What you would need is like your income tax return. And, you know, I think everyone should have an idea of what a school would expect them to pay, right, going forward. And you can start this years earlier than when your kid is heading to you know, senior. I would advise you can even, families can do it when their kids are in junior, you know, middle school, for instance. Now, the next really good tool that I like is the net price calculator. Okay. And you're going to need some of the same information that you would need for the EFC calculator. Okay. Now, a net price calculator provides a personal estimate of what 1 year of college will cost a family. Okay. So you input the information into the calculator, you know, your financial information. And then if it's a school that provides merit scholarship money and if it's a good calculator, they should ask you, okay, what is your child's GPA or test scores or class rank, that sort of thing. And then they will determine, the calculator will determine, is this kid qualified for any federal money, any state money? And are we going to give this child any money? Need-based aid or institutional merit aid? And then they add that up, subtract it from the cost of attendance, and that's your net price. And that's what matters. It doesn't matter what a school sticker price is or what the average price or what somebody down the street from you paid. It's your individual net price. Okay. Now, it's a lot of colleges don't really, I mean, this has been mandated by the federal government, having a net price calculator on the website for almost 10 years. They often can be hidden because schools don't really like these calculators or have to do them. So if you just, you know, do a Google search, you'll find the net price calculator for individual school. As I said, I think I already said, you need the same financial information for a net price calculator as you would use for an EOC calculator. Now, one of the cool things you can do with these calculators is play with some variables. For instance, out here, in Silicon Valley, it's important. You got home equity can be an important factor for those profile schools. Okay. And if you're wondering, oh, what schools are the profile schools? You can just Google CSS profile and you'll get the homepage. And right on the homepage, click on members of the profile. And then you'll get them all. Okay. So so I should say, if you're not a profile school, right, about 200, schools are not going to count your home equity at all. They're not even going to ask for it. Their own FAFSA only schools do not put your home equity in there. So like all of the state schools here in California, they don't ask about home equity at all. All the FAFSA schools don't put it in. Okay. Now the profile schools can vary. Some, the minority, don't use it at all. Stanford just isn't using it at all now. They just recently did that. Harvard, I think Whitman College, there's a few, but they're the minority. Okay. So, and some schools are not they're not forthcoming and telling you how do they use home equity. And some will say, well, you can, we'll use 100%. Some will use 100% home equity and assess it as a parent asset, which would be assessed at up to 5%. Okay. Some schools, which I think is kind of disingenuous, will say, oh, well, we assess 100%, but people can appeal that. Well, how are parents even going to know that how home equity impacted the award? But now and you can ask, hey, how did you assess my home equity? So what you can do is use the net price calculator, run it with your home equity, and then run it again without it and see, is there a difference in the award? Okay. You can do the same thing with test scores. I know it's hard now to do tests, get the test, and a lot of schools are test optional. But you can put in scores and see, like if your child has taken the test, put in the scores and see what the award is, and then increase the test scores and see if it would impact the award. Because some people are wondering, oh, is it worth the hassle of trying to take it again if you have managed to take it once? And then you can do the same with grade point average. It's harder to move grade point averages after a certain time, though. Now, I can't emphasize this enough, that if money is an issue, and you run a school's net price calculator and the results are bad, you're going to have to pay a lot more than you like or can afford, I would say to parents, don't let your child apply to those schools, okay? Or greatly limit their expectations and say, look, this school, it says, we're going to have to pay $60,000. We don't have that. We don't want to spend that. And then it's multiplied over 4 years. So we're not doing that. If you want to go ahead and apply, go ahead, but know that if the net price result is the same as what we're going to get ultimately, you're not going to that school. Okay. And that will reduce the possibility of making emotional and financially reckless decisions. Okay. I can't emphasize enough that I don't think parents should not fall for this argument of students who say, I tried so hard in high school, I worked so hard, I deserve to go to my dream school. Well, no one, just because you work hard in high school, which, you should do anyway, that doesn't entitle you to the parents to spend $300,000 or more for one lousy little bachelor's degree, right? So this can give you a heads up of what the prices could be, and nip this dream school thing in the bud if it's not going to work out financially. Okay. Now, having said that you should use net price calculators, there are some bad ones out there. Now, the good news is most private schools have good calculators. Okay. I think the UCs, Cal States have good ones. But there are some, like a minority of brand name schools have lousy calculators. One of the most notable is NYU, which is actually when you look at the most popular schools that kids go to outside of California, NYU's way up at the top of the list. And NYU is, it's kind of in its own category because it has horrible need-based financial aid and horrible merit scholarships, like hardly any. So this is like a deadly combination, right? Usually schools that have really good need-based aid might not have merit scholarships, or they have really good merit scholarships, not so great need-based aid. But to be lousy in both categories is pretty stunning. So anyway, why I have this, you're wondering what this arrow is pointing to. This is the interface, okay, for schools that use the lousy calculator, which it's the federal template. So the federal template, if I had more time, I would actually show you NYU's net price calculator, but it doesn't ask about your assets at all. And it only has a range about your income, which instead of asking, oh, on this line of your income tax return, what is your adjusted gross income? Instead, they have these ranges, and the top range tops out at $99,999, which is crazy. Okay, so if you see this, know that it's a waste of time to use that calculator. Okay, now I think it's really important to use the net price calculator if you are applying to a college early decision, right? And it's probably, many of you know that if you apply early decision, a child applies, you're more likely to get in. Your chances of increase dramatically for most schools. Well, maybe not dramatically, but they do increase, sometimes dramatically, to get in. And I think that is especially true now with COVID, because schools were already stressed out because so many students apply to so many different colleges, right? Especially, in affluent school districts where you might have kids applying to 15, 20 schools, which is nuts. So colleges have increasingly, especially private schools, have increasingly turned to early decision to kind of lock in some of those kids. Because when you apply early decision, you're supposed to promise that you will go even if you get no money from that school. Okay. Now, as a practical matter, nobody can force you to go to any school, right? So, you could walk away. Who's going to stop you, right? But still, you're supposed to do this in good faith, and you should. And I would say, don't apply early decision unless you've run the net price calculator and you can see, oh, this is what the school's going to cost. Okay. Now, yeah, I've already said that our students have an advantage applying early decision, and I think the ED is going to increase. Schools are going to be increasing, using them even more for this admission season. Now, one great resource to find out statistics on early decision admission rates versus regular decision, as well as early action that some schools have. Early action, you apply early like you do for early decision, typically in November. And but you'll get your answer earlier, but you aren't required to actually go like early decision. So anyway, college transitions, if you just Google it, you'll find it, and you can click on this Dataverse, and they have tons of different statistics. Some of you who love statistics go nuts in there because they have all sorts of statistics, all sorts of admission areas. Okay, so just go on there and you can look at lots of different statistics. But I'll show you just here one that's like really dramatic. Is at American University in Washington, D.C., the early decision admission rate is 85%, and its regular decision is 33%. Clearly, these people are relying on locking kids in early. Okay. Now, one of the pandemic fallouts is colleges will likely accept more students than they normally would. Schools will maintain a longer wait list, many schools, because of the uncertainty. And it could be easier to get off of wait lists because of that. Oftentimes in the past, some of these wait lists are just a joke, and some schools will put kids on a wait list just because they don't want to maybe offend parents who are alumni of a school, or just as a way to let kids off easy. But now I think there's definitely more use of a wait list. Now, another COVID change is that colleges and universities are aggressively recruiting students for this next fall. Okay. Many schools are sweetening their offers because they need to attract as many students as they can during the uncertainty. So some schools, they've reduced their tuition or fees, discounts, which have always been, for most schools, there's been discounting going on. It's meant most students do not pay full price for college, but now I think the discounts are even deeper at some schools because they have to, because of COVID, and schools are stressed about getting enough kids, and staying alive, they are going to sweeten the deal. Now, here's an interesting statistics. This is the average discount at private colleges and universities, the average tuition discount at private schools. As that was the latest annual report from the National Association from College and University Business Officers, and you can see that. And this is before COVID. And as I said earlier, most kids don't pay full price at private colleges. Almost 89% of students do not pay full price. They either get tuition discount or a tuition discount because of need-based aid or merit scholarships, or both. Now, for affluent students looking for merit scholarships, the bargains will not be the rankings alpha dogs among private and public universities, okay? The most elite private research universities give little to no merit scholarships. However, they often give the best need-based aid, okay? Now, the most popular schools don't have to try as hard to attract affluent students or try at all because they get plenty of kids, applying to their colleges. Now, the universities on the East and West coasts tend to have the highest net prices. That is, after typical need-based or merit-based aid is subtracted, they still have high net prices. These are among the top 5% most expensive schools net price. And most of them, if you look on the list, the federal government generates this list every year. Most of them are on the East and West Coast. Why? Well, it's probably not too hard to figure out. Kids want to go to schools in cities on the East and West Coast, okay? These schools are not dummies. They know that. And so they don't have to be as generous with financial aid. They don't have to be as generous with merit scholarship money, right? So, you might get, if you're lucky, maybe a $10,000 or $12,000 merit scholarship some kids would get. Let's compare that to my son's alma mater. He went to Beloit College in Wisconsin, about 90 minutes from O'Hare Airport. It was really convenient because there's buses that went many times a day to Rockford, Beloit, and up to Madison, Wisconsin. It was super easy. And that's something that if you're looking at schools outside of California, you should, I would suggest looking to see how easy or hard is it for a child to get there. It was super easy for my son to get to Beloit, even though you'd think, oh my gosh, rural Wisconsin, that's a hike. But really, I don't think it would take less time to fly there than probably to drive from San Diego, where I am, up to, UC Berkeley or UC Santa Cruz. Okay. So anyway, it's just something to think about. Now, one thing that I like to talk about is considering spreading a wider net when looking at schools. There are three major types of these schools: research universities, master's level universities, and colleges, most notably liberal arts colleges. Okay. Now, these are the characteristics of research university. They're big schools, typically lots and lots of majors, big campuses. The number one priority is professor research. That's why they get the name. Lecture hall classes are common. professors could stand up in a lecture hall and teach, if that's what you call it. And then graduate students would be the ones in smaller groups to actually teach the kids. And the number one priority at research universities is graduate education. And some schools, particularly a lot of state universities, will offer honors colleges for the brightest kids so that they will attract those kids who might otherwise go to private schools with maybe, it varies, but it could have smaller classes or maybe get a professor mentor, that sort of thing. But I think what a lot of people don't know is the third priority at research universities is the undergraduates there. So research universities, they are, the ones that are the most popular, right, among people who are, looking at different schools, because they have people across the country who are kind of into this whole college thing have heard of these names. So what does that mean? Once again, these schools are, they're businesses, right? And they're pricing themselves accordingly. So these kind of schools that have brand names, right? Kids aspire to go to them. They look impressive on a sweatshirt. They do not give a lot of the kids in some of these schools, the majority of students pay full price, which could be $75,000 now. The kids who have to pay full price are the very high income students. These kind of schools attract very wealthy students typically, okay? So at Wake Forest, it's shocking that 64% of students pay full price at that school. So the school primarily educates very wealthy students. At Tufts, it's not much different. So you can see here, and that's because high income families will pay full price for these kind of schools because they think this will give them advantage, their kids in their future careers, or it looks impressive. It's gonna, people will be jealous that a kid got into Johns Hopkins or Georgetown or Stanford. Now let's look at a different kind of school. Liberal arts colleges, okay? They are the number one priority because usually that's all they have. They don't have graduate schools. They're smaller schools. They don't have as many majors. They don't have sometimes few, if any, vocational majors, though a lot of these schools now have business because business major is very popular. They do have small classes. Finding professor mentors is very easy. And these kids, compared to many kids who go to different kinds of schools, ultimately attend graduate school in higher numbers, right? And one thing you got to, I just want to say that, I'm not saying that any one type of school is superior to another one, okay? You can do well at whatever kind of school you go to. I'm going to talk about that. But I just think it's important to know the characteristics of these schools, okay? Instead of just being enamored by brand names. And, both of my kids, I had one student, one kid, my daughter, the oldest, who was just an extrovert, phenomenal networking. She could have done great at a research university, right? She could have done fine at Berkeley where her dad had gotten his undergrad degree, okay? She ended up at a liberal arts college because she loved the idea of having a great attention and having small classes and getting to know the professors, and she did extremely well. On the other hand, my son, she was an entrepreneur, Spanish major. My son was a math major and a studio art minor, and he's an introvert, right? He needs the connection with his professors. And I think if he had gone to a research university, he would not have thrived at all, but and it was a tough major. Math is not easy. At least for most people, it's not easy, not for me. So at a small school, he had more opportunity to do well. There were quizzes, there were exams, there were participation, he had projects, he had in some classes 8, max was probably 20 kids in his class. He could talk to his his professor. One time he was walking out of his class and the professor said, "Hey, Ben, did you get that? You know, look like you're a little puzzled." And Ben goes, "Yeah, I was." And he goes, "Well, come into my office. Let's talk about it." Well, that would not have happened at a research university where there's 300 kids in the class. It just wouldn't happen. Okay. He also had mentors when he went to graduate school. He had great advice from them. You can see here, because liberal arts college, they don't have that national reputation. These schools have to try harder, right? So you have, you know, schools like Allegheny in Pennsylvania and Hendricks in Arkansas, University of Puget Sound. They give most kids money. Like my son's school, Beloit, 98% of kids get something. Now, on the other hand, you've got some that are the most popular liberal arts colleges, the most elite that turn away the most people, right? Pomona, Claremont McKenna in Southern California, they are more like the research universities because they get a lot of rich kids at those schools, so they don't have to give merit scholarship money, or very little, okay? Now let's look at master's level universities. These are schools that are kind of between, they can be a kind of a, somewhere between a research university and a college, okay? They have few, if any, PhD programs, certainly far less than an intense research university. They can be more undergraduate focused. Many Catholic universities are in this category. You can find these schools if you're wondering, what's a master's level school? They're also called regional universities. You can look for these schools in US News's regional university category. And it's important to judge how important undergrads are at these schools. And that's just something you're gonna have to find when you go to the school or talk to kids at the colleges, research these schools, because with research university, you know, their priority is PhD research, you know, professor research and graduate education. You know, at a liberal arts colleges, the priority is undergrads, but it can be hard. You've got to assess it out at a master's level school. This is just an example of, you know, if you go to US News and you can find the different schools in these categories, the different regional universities. And you can see here, once again, that, you know, regional master's level schools don't have the, you know, national name, right? And so they have to try harder, but most kids get money from these schools. Now, once again, there's exceptions like Santa Clara University in Villanova, like Santa Clara. Hey, it's in the Silicon Valley. It's near Apple and Google, and kids want to go there and get jobs, you know, high-tech jobs. So Santa Clara knows that, and they're not going to give money to a lot of kids because they can get rich kids to come and pay full price. It's the same with Villanova in Philadelphia, right? And they have a great basketball team lately, so they do the same thing. Okay. Now, especially during COVID, I would do not assume that the first offer is the last offer, right? I mean, some of this will depend on particularly private schools, like how many acceptances are they going to be getting next year? You know, by March and April, they could be getting kind of stressed, and the offer that they gave you initially, you could get more, whether it's need-based aid or merit scholarship money. Another thing especially during this, you know, challenging time, is high-income kids will likely benefit from the pandemic when applying to many colleges. State schools, not in California, but, you know, outside of California, and also private schools. And why is that? Well, if you can read this story that was done, I'll never forget this story reading. It was in the front page of the New York Times. It was, you can look it up. If you just Google Reed College and New York Times, you'll find it. But Reed, which is a very elite liberal arts colleges, has a extremely high percentage of students per capita who go on to get PhDs. This was back during the recession of 2008 and 9, okay? And Reed had selected their freshman class. They sent it over to the financial aid office to do the financial aid packages. And the financial aid folks said, OMG, too many kids need financial aid in your list of accepted students. We already have kids at Reed who need more money because of the recession and their parents have lost jobs. We can't We can't take care of all these kids. You have to kick off over 100 students who need financial aid and replace them with full pay kids. So that's what they did. There was a lot of hue and cry about it at the time when this was in the New York Times. But what the article did not mention is this happens all the time at schools. I mean, not that drastic, but all schools are need aware. And after a certain point, you get through, they use up their financial aid, and then they start looking for full pay kids or kids who don't, maybe you could throw a little merit scholarship at them and they will sign on. So that is something really the major, by far, the major affirmative action program our practices in this country in terms of higher ed is high income students. They don't often, in some of these private schools, they don't have to be as accomplished as other students to get into these schools because they can pay more. Now, here's a reality check. Roughly 75% of students get into their first choice college every year, according to the annual UCLA does a survey, extensive survey of college freshmen attending four-year schools. And this is pre-COVID-19. So for all those who feel like, oh my gosh, all schools are rejecting most students, it's not true. Okay. This is actually something on Twitter that I like. This guy is a big shot at Oregon State's enrollment management, and also used to be at DePaul University until this year. And I think what he says is absolutely true. There are only two types of colleges in the US. Those that deny students they would like to admit, maybe 40 of them, and those that admit students they probably like to deny, everyone else. Admissions is not usually a process of turning down well-qualified students. Now, it's important to understand that sacrificing financially for an elite university can be absolutely unnecessary and a bad move, okay? This is from Alan Kruger, a late Princeton economist. He did some studies I'm going to mention, but he said, students who apply to and are accepted by elite schools are likely to be high achievers. High achieving students are likely to have high earnings regardless of where they attend college. Let that sink in, okay, folks? Now, Kruger was a co-author of two landmark studies, got huge press over the years. The first one, they looked at students who graduated from Ivy League schools and those who were accepted into Ivy League schools but attended other institutions. Okay, when they looked at what these two groups were making in terms of salaries, essentially they were making the same thing over their careers, the same salaries. It didn't matter that they had gone, some of them had gone to Ivy League and others hadn't. They were just all smart people, right? Now, the second study I thought was even more interesting because the first study was all kids who had been accepted to Ivy Leagues and only some of them decided to go. The second study was they looked at kids who graduated from the Ivies as well as students who were rejected from all of the Ivies but had shared the same high academic profile. And when you looked at those two sets of graduates, they were making the same salaries as well over their careers. It didn't matter that they would, that some kids went to the Ivies. It was just that these are smart, aspiring students, promising kids, and they did well no matter where they went, okay? Let that sink in, okay? This is just, if you want to Google this was a New York Times article from back in 2011 when the last study was released, and you can get a lot more information about both of these studies. But I think it's really important because so many parents, at least more affluent school districts, parents feel like, oh, my kids have to go to certain schools, or they're not going to make it in life, or I'm a failure or whatever. And it can put too much stress on these kids and it's not necessary, okay? This is something to keep in mind that Kruger said. The average SAT score at the most selective college that students apply to is a better predictor of their future earnings than the average SAT score at the college they attended. Okay. So who benefits from Ivy League schools? Well, research has shown that a bachelor's degree from an elite school boosts the salaries of low-income, minority, first-gen students, right, whose parents have not gone to college, but it does not benefit affluent students. Okay. Now, back in a couple of years ago, there was researchers at University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Tulane who decided, let's go back and revisit all of this research that Alan Kruger had done, the last of which had been published in 2011. And let's see if it's really holds up. So what they decided was, yeah, it amazingly, well, not so amazingly did. High income white males were not making any more if they'd gone to elite school or not. Okay, smart kids. Now, with white women, they did have an increase in salary, 14% over if they had attended a school that had a SAT, if they attended a school that had, higher SATs, the women going to these schools. But there was a big but to that. These women did not make any more in their salaries per hour. It was just that they ended up staying in the workforce longer, and were slightly less chance of them ending up getting married. But they ended up, those that did get married delayed it and delayed having children later. And that's why they were making more. It's not that they were making any more per hour. Now, the ones who were benefiting were the first gen kids, the low income kids, minority kids, right? They, Blacks, Hispanic kids, they did benefit from elite education. And it makes sense because they did not have parents who went to college, right? They didn't have ability to network, and their parents, they didn't have parents who could help them get an internship or help them get that first job, right? The kids who grow up in gold ticket families don't need to go to a gold ticket school. That's what all these research is saying. They can go anywhere, right? But it's the low income kids who could definitely get a boost if they go to a very elite school. Okay. And then you've had chance, I guess, to read this, but basically what the Atlantic article was saying is, for high-strung affluent parents, well-compensated counselors, members of the elite admission industrial complex, just relax, okay? You are inflicting on American teenagers a ludicrous amount of pointless anxiety, even if you subscribe to the dubious idea that young people ought to maximize for vocational prestige and income. The research suggests that elite colleges are not critical to achieving these ends. In the aggregate, individual characteristics swamp institutional characteristics. It's more important to be hardworking and curious than to receive a certain thick envelope. This is art, if you want to know more about this, I really like this white paper done by Challenge Success, which is affiliated to Stanford, and they look at why college engagement matters more than selectivity, rather than, why it's more important to be engaged than to go to an elite school. One of the things you'll see in the white paper is that college rankings are seriously flawed. I'm not going to get into it because I'm running out of time, but what I would suggest is you Google the New Yorker. Malcolm Gladwell had a fantastic article on college rankings back in 2011, and you will get the whole idea of why rankings are bad. I used to write for US News and World Report. I quit because I couldn't stand the rankings are so bad and have done so much destruction to families in the higher ed world and how they operate that I just couldn't bear it anymore. What I would do, the college rankings, how I would use them as a tip sheet, especially for low visibility categories like liberal arts colleges and master's level universities. Look at that to get some ideas of schools and then research them. For goodness sake, don't believe the numerical rankings that they attach to institutions. Now, what does matter when a kid goes to college? I don't think it matters that much where they go to college as opposed to what they do wherever they end up. And Purdue and Gallup did a ton of research about what is it about college, or there's some colleges that are just better than others. They wanted to see what kind of schools, if there were, that would kids ended up graduating with bachelor's degrees that were happier in their lives and in their careers. Okay. They did a ton of research, and what they determined was, no, it's not a particular kind of college that mattered. It was what you did, what a student did at wherever they landed at, whether it was a place like Stanford or San Jose State. Okay. These are the things that matter. Did you have at least one professor who made you excited about learning? Did you have a professor who cared about you as a person? Did you have a mentor who encouraged you to pursue your goals and dreams? And then did you work on a project that took at least a semester or more to complete? Did you have an internship or job that allowed you to apply what you were learning in the classroom? Were you extremely active in extracurricular activities? Only 3%, sadly, of the 30,000 Americans that were surveyed who had just a bachelor's degree could say yes to all those. That is horrible, right? But this is what, the more people could say yes to the answers, the more likely they were happy in their lives and in their careers. Now, I wrote a story a few years ago about this is my daughter who did make the most out of it. When she graduated this little school most people have never heard of, Juniata College in Pennsylvania. When she was graduating, the president of the college came up to me and said, Lynn, Caitlin squeezed the absolute most out of her college education, out of her liberal arts education. And she absolutely did. And I think because of that, she had no problem coming back to San Diego, getting a job. She started working at a toy company, rose up the ranks to become a marketing director. And she ultimately has a startup. She's actually lives in the Silicon Valley now. And her company, Maximal Space, is a California leading ADU educator. In fact, they are in the seed round now so she can expand. But she's in LA, San Diego, and Silicon Valley now with her startup. So it didn't matter. Did she have to go to elite school? No, she was just, a go-getter, and she really applied herself in college and made the absolute most out of it. One other thing I'm going to say about this, about another example of a family who's had followed my blog, and a lot of people, he took my class, online class, the College Cost Lab, and he had decided, reading about what I'd said for years, decided that his daughter, who had wanted to go to Northwestern University, was that was her dream school. She got in. Her dad was a attorney in Chicago, and they decided we could afford to pay $300,000 for her bachelor's degree, but we don't want to do that. One, we'd rather save a lot of that money and apply it to graduate school, which matters more, or give her all these experiences in undergrad. She could go do internships or study abroad. It wouldn't matter. She could do whatever she wanted, right? Or she could have money left over if she didn't want to go to grad school to buy a house, down payment. So they told her kid, we're not paying for Northwestern. The kid was hysterical and cried for a couple of days, but she ultimately decided to go to University of Pittsburgh that had offered her a great scholarship. And I mean, she bounced back really quickly. Now you might think, yeah, but she went to University of Pittsburgh. So what was her chances for graduate school? They were great. I mean, she got mentors at Pitt, and she got phenomenal experience, and she got a full ride offer to Tufts University in grad school. She got an offer from Miami University in Ohio. She got into London School of Economics and some other schools, and she ultimately decided to go to Oxford, where she is now, and she's really happy. And she was, her dad reached out to me saying, I am so happy. We are so happy we decided to skip Northwestern, and Mallory is thrilled. And she has all these friends who are, have a lot of debt, and she doesn't. All the money they saved because they didn't go to Northwestern, she got to go to Oxford instead. Now, one other thing that I'm almost done, but one other thing that I think is important is schools are not monolithic. Families should check at the department level, okay? So you can be enamored by a brand name school, but if your child's going into economics, do you know anything about the economics department? Is it a good economics department, right? Do they have kids who go on to graduate school or get good jobs out of that? no school is great, right? There are some greatness in probably almost every school, some departments. You might have a wonderful chemistry department and a lousy business school, right? So you have to check on the department level, okay? In any of these schools, okay? The final thing I'm going to talk about is just researching a college financial stability, because, this is a hard time for private schools and also for state schools. But, state schools have state support. So state support's going to dwindle, across the country. It did during the last recession. In fact, state support has never recovered in most places since they cut it back in the recession of 2008 and 9. But, there are some private schools that will probably close or, cut down on majors. And so it's important, I think, to just research, schools. You could do that on my website. My latest blog post is researching whether a college will close. My website is thecollegesolution.com. So I'd urge you to look at that. There's like 4 resources that you can look at when you're exploring primarily private colleges, but there are some that talk about state schools as well. So anyway, that's what I have. I tried to jam a lot in. I could talk for hours, but anyway, I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Hi, Lynn, do you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions, and I want to thank you all for just all the wonderful questions that you asked. We're going to try to get through whatever we can, okay? We'll start with some sort of short ones and then work our way in as much as we can do for 15 minutes or so. So again, lots of really great questions. We appreciate all the thoughtful queries that you had. Let's go. What year taxes do they use for the FAFSA, Lynn?
Okay, so they use 2-year-old taxes. So for kids who are applying to school for next fall, 2021, 2022, you would use 2019 taxes returns.
Okay. Can non-citizens get financial aid?
In some schools they can. They can get need-based aid, but certainly non-residents can definitely get merit scholarship money for sure.
Okay. How does a child whose parents are divorced be impacted by the EFC, estimated family contribution?
Right. Well, that's a good question. So it varies by the formula. If you're just looking at a FAFSA, right? And most schools are FAFSA, they're only interested in looking at the income and assets of the custodial parent. Now, it's a weird definition of what the custodial parent is. It's whatever parent, wherever the child lived for the majority of a 12-month period ending on the day you file the FAFSA. So let's say somebody's going to file the FAFSA on November 15th of this year. You would look back to November 15th of last year and go, where did that child live? So, ideally, it would be the parent who has less income and less assets. Now, and it doesn't matter who claimed the kid on a tax return, that makes no difference, right? Now, with the profile schools, it's different. Typically, they're going to request the income and assets for the original parents, so even if a parent had remarried, it doesn't matter. It's going to be the original parent. Now, for the FAFSA schools, if the custodial parent remarries, then the new spouse's assets and income will count.
Okay, thank you. So that's something to check with probably with the college.
Yeah, what you can do is for profile schools, if you go to the profiles website and click on the membership schools, there's actually a column that has non-custodial parents, and it says whether they use them or not. There are a couple of standouts that don't. University of Chicago doesn't use custodial, the second parent, and neither does Vanderbilt, but most of them do.
Okay, thank you. Here's a timely question. Given the societal climate these days, how much will race factor into college admission?
Well, like I said, that most the people who have the biggest benefit in terms of college admissions are rich students. But there are like here in California, race cannot be considered, right? I mean, I think it's on the ballot right this year, but I don't know. Certainly colleges are more aware of the inequities, right? Because of all the upheaval this year. But I really don't know if they are, focusing on, oh, we need to accept more low income minority students.
Okay, thank you. So at the beginning of the program, you mentioned upper middle class and wealthy kids.
Yeah,
Here in Silicon Valley, $150,000 a year is not high living,
right.
but nationally that may be. Is the EFC adjusted for the locality where the child lives?
You know, um, the FAFSA does, or actually the profile does adjust it a little bit for certain cities, knowing that, oh, it does cost more to live in San Francisco, right? Or, Palo Alto, right? But it's not going to really help that much. I think really for a lot of people out here who have high incomes, but the expenses are super high, you have to, be looking at schools that give merit scholarships money, and also look at some schools that have lower sticker prices to begin with, right? Don't look at the ones that just going to charge you so much and expect you to pay full price. Like, it's not worth it. That's why you have to be smarter about it and look for schools that have lower prices and higher better merit scholarship. For instance, I'm just going to mention my son's school again as an example of liberal arts college. I think the average merit scholarship is like, I don't know, $34,000 a year. I mean, so there are deals out there because some schools have to try harder, right? But yeah, is it fair? No, it's not fair, but it's just the reality that you just have to be smart about what kind of schools you apply to, because you're not going to get a break with the need-based formulas.
Yeah, and as Lynn mentioned, I really want to emphasize, really talk with your child, your student, about those different kinds of colleges. I sent both of my young adults to research universities, but if I had known the mentoring and research opportunities at some of the smaller schools, especially in the interior of the country, we might have done things differently. So really, I think that is just a great piece of advice. Okay, I know we have so many questions coming in, but we've had some waiting. So here we go. For the FAFSA, do they consider just the college tuition cost, or do they also calculate in housing and books when considering the EFC, estimated family contribution?
Well, the EFC is, you generate that based on your own finances, right? And how many kids are going to go to college. If you have 2 kids in college at the same time, your EFC is going to drop by 50% with the FAFSA. But then you subtract that from the cost of the school, and the cost, it's subtracted from the cost of attendance, which is your tuition, your room and board. And, schools will throw in different numbers for like books or miscellaneous, that sort of thing. And so your EFC is subtracted from the cost of attendance. And that is what, that's what the school knows you can afford to pay, right? Or, I mean, not what you can afford, the gap between the cost of attendance, your EFC, and what's left is what you're hoping to get in terms of need-based aid.
Okay, and here's a related question. Do colleges tell families how much financial aid or scholarship a student will get for all 4 years?
No, it's yearly right now. One thing that you should, well, because with need-based aid, your income and assets can change every year, right? So you have to apply every year to get need-based aid. Now, for merit scholarships, you should look to see what is the requirement in terms of keeping that merit scholarship. Like, I had a dear friend here in San Diego. She's a doctor here in town, and she had a really bright kid. He wanted to go into engineering, and he wanted to go to Montana State. And their top scholarship, which he could have gotten, required a 3.5 to maintain it, which is really high for us to maintain a scholarship. And he was going into engineering, which it's tough to keep him 3.5. So he ended up deciding, I'm not going to go for the very top one. I'm going to go for the second best one. And that's what he did because he didn't want to stress about keeping a 3.5 for 4 years.
Okay, good advice. Here's a question I think a lot of parents could be asking or should be asking. Do you have any advice for students who are undecided on what their career path will be?
Well, I think one thing that you should, I mean, ideally, college is a way to explore to see what you want. Now, the problem is there are some schools that require you to know. So, um, I mean, the schools that are, I guess, um, are the most into taking undecided kids is liberal arts colleges, right? I mean, you don't even have to declare a major until the end of your sophomore year. But that is, if you're undecided, I think it's important to, when you're looking at schools, find out, how uh, do you have to declare a major right up front? I mean, the most extreme example is St. Louis Obispo, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
they are, I think it's criminal, but they make you say exactly what your major is, not just engineering, but what kind of engineering, right? I mean, that's really crazy if you ask me. But, you should look to see, can you be undeclared, right? And then how hard is it to, or if you start with a major, how hard is it to transfer to another major? You just have to look at those, the flexibility for kids who aren't sure what they want.
yeah, really good point. Really good point. Here's one that I think applies to a lot of people in Silicon Valley. My son completed his high school in California and he holds H-4 visa and doesn't have a social security number. How do we complete the FAFSA? It looks like an SSN is required.
Well, I think you have to be a citizen or have a green card to get need-based financial aid. That's my understanding. So you could look for schools that give merit scholarships to students, of which most do. You could ask schools about that situation. But I think for federal and state aid, you need to be a citizen or have a green card. There are some private schools that will give need-based aid to international students. And typically, if you go to the College Board and type in the name of a school, on the left-hand column, there's a hyperlink is international students, which I don't know if I guess they qualify as international students. And you can see if they give money, what kind of, if they give money, need-based aid to students, international kids.
Okay, fair enough. We got a number of questions about families who may have more than one child heading into college at the same time. So
Mhm.
for example, this person asked, is there any provision for twins? We'll have two kids in college at the same time. Do they take that into consideration for financial aid?
Oh, absolutely. So it's in part of the EFC formula. So the EFC is when you have two kids in college, whatever your EFC was for would have been for one child, with two in, it drops by 50%. So you get a huge advantage if you have, I mean, triplets is even better, right? Because now the profile, I think, drops it by 40%, your EFC. So yeah, you get a huge advantage as opposed to families that space their kids like 4 years apart. They get no break. But kids, so yeah, it's a
Okay.
good thing actually.
And I
I
know
know it doesn't feel like it.
we want our students to be as independent as they can be with the college admission process, but Lynn does make the point that when it comes to finances, parents, you really need to be involved. And when it comes to filling in the FAFSA, I think that's important. So for
Oh
example,
yeah.
here's a question, it's a good one. Do we need to fill out the FAFSA to get merit-based aid?
No. I mean, there could be a few schools that require it. I know Georgia Tech, I had a friend here in San Diego, and their daughter went to Georgia Tech for engineering, and they weren't going to apply. He was a judge, she's a lawyer. They weren't going to apply for any aid, but the school told them, hey, we need that for merit scholarship consideration. But, I think that's rare, but you can always ask the school, hey, do we need to apply for, file the FAFSA if we're not going to qualify for any need-based aid and just want a merit scholarship.
Okay, fair enough. So we're going to take two more, Lynn. You ready?
Mhm.
This is a good question. What is the best way to know the quality of a university department? You mentioned looking into that when considering a college.
Right. There's a lot of factors involved. In fact, I wrote actually it's in my class. I have it. I have a something about how to create a college list, but I also have, that excerpt of it on my blog. So what I would suggest is you just Google researching academic departments and either my name or the college solution. But there's a lot of things you can do. You can first look at the website and then see what opportunities there are for how they treat undergraduates, for instance. And do they say, oh, this is where kids go after college, or do they go to graduate school? How much importance do they put on undergrads? But I would definitely go and look at that blog post. The other thing that I think is really cool that I would suggest is there's this great website, Educate to Career. And there's just some data scientists that do this kind of on the side. And they actually, if you go onto their website, educatetocareer.org, and or maybe it's .com, but I think it's .org, and click on either the high school consular or the college, the consular link, and then scroll down and look at college major outcomes. I think that's what it is. You can type in the name of any school with a major, almost any school with a major, and it will tell you what those recent grads are getting in terms of salary with the most popular occupations of that particular major. Okay. So that is super cool. And this is real statistics pulled from not just information from the colleges, but from dozens of different websites, many of them government websites. So I would urge you to check that out.
Okay, great resource, Lynn. All right. We want to respect everybody's time. So one final question. We've been talking a fair amount about public universities, both in California and across the nation. This one is focused more on private schools. Where can we find a list of profile schools? Is it worth creating a CSS profile if you're not applying to one of the profile schools?
No, and if you just Google CSS profile on that homepage, you'll see the link with all the member schools. And yeah, there would be no reason to fill out the CSS profile if you're not going to apply to one of these 200 or so schools that use the profile for undergrads.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lynn. I know we have packed it in this evening. Again, reminding everyone that this event has been video recorded and will be available on the Parent Ventures video library in about a week. So thank you, Lynn O'Shaughnessy. Thank you to Rita. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. Have a good evening, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.